What is cracking, everybody? Hello and welcome back to Gaming 101 with Mr. Berger. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at this Exenado Balloon Cycle Deck. And this is a really interesting deck. Obviously what you see here is it's a combination of two really powerful combinations, essentially, right? You've got, first of all, the Executioner Tornado combo, which, as you guys probably know, is extremely deadly. And on top of that, you've got this kind of Pompeo-esque balloon cycle deck hiding in the background there, or maybe in the foreground, and the Exenado's in the background, right? So let's talk about really quickly how I found this deck, and then we'll get into the replays and, well, not the replays, but rather the strategies as I run the replays in the background. So this deck, again, was found on Royale API, which is a great website I've been using lately. Some people think it's not so great because it encourages, kind of like a rock, paper, scissors meta, but it's a great resource for, lower skilled players like myself to find decks that they can do well with, that they can try out to switch things up. So I found it on there, and actually this deck wasn't one of the top played decks, so it's not a super meta deck. It was actually a deck that I saw somebody lose 3 times with on their 11th, game in a grand challenge. So regardless, I was like, this looks like a really cool deck, and even if this pro or this good player only got to 11 wins, that's still really good. 11 wins in a grand challenge. I've probably gotten like 1 or 2 wins in a grand challenge ever, but hey, I mostly play classics, to be fair. Alright, so that's how I came across this deck. I should have taken the person's name so that I could properly tribute them. So if they're out there, let me know if you guys know exactly the person who crafted this deck, and I'll definitely be sure to tribute them in like the title, the description, so on and so forth. Now, as I mentioned, you got the combination of those two really powerful, synergy-like cards. Synergistic, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Is that even a word? Anyway, those cards that work really well together. And I want to say again that it's kind of remnant of a Pompeo balloon cycle deck, because you got that kind of minor balloon in there. You got the zap in there to retarget, and I'll talk about that a little bit more soon here, and so on and so forth. So let's talk about strategies now that I've rambled on enough for the whole intro and where I found it and everything. Alright guys, so with the combination of the Executioner and the Tornado, you have this huge defensive potential, so you can really provide a really massive, powerful counter push to whatever they send in. Even if they've got like a golem and a whole bunch of support behind it and some storm units coming in, or a mini-tank or whatever, you've got that Executioner and that Tornado. You place the Executioner down, you Tornado everything together, and then maybe you zap it to top it all off, and the Executioner will just cleave them all with his massive axe, and it'll do an insane amount of damage. So try to play the Executioner, that being said, in places where he'll cleave multiple units. Now, you're not always going to have the Tornado in hand, and maybe you'll use it for something else, like pulling away a Goblin Barrel or pulling away a Hog, so you actually play the Executioner without the Tornado quite often. In that case, you got to make sure that it's like a magic archer, but a little bit easier to aim. In that case, you want to make sure that excuse me, that the Executioner is placed in an area where he gets a good angle, so he can hit multiple units at the same time. So, for example, really good places to put him are right in front of and right behind the Princess Tower, because that'll make sure that he cleaves everything down the lane that's coming down, at your Princess Tower. I like to use him kind of in the center of the arena, but I try to get him in a nice little sweet spot where he'll hit multiple units at once. And again, if you combine him with that Tornado, it'll shut down just about any push. And we can see here in the replay that I pretty much slowly but surely finished off my opponent. At this point, I just cycle back to minor, and all I need to do really is cycle to zap, so I just kind of troll and use the, Tornado up there, and manage to get that tower down. So let's go ahead and move on to the next replay here. Alright guys, so I want to talk about the element of cycle that this deck has, now that I've kind of explained the Executioner Tornado combo, and the idea behind it and how powerful it can really be. So the element of cycle that you have in this deck, well, it's pretty obvious, honestly. Look at the first 2 cards in the top left there. You got the Skeletons, which cost 1 elixir. You got the Ice Spirit, which also costs 1 elixir. And then you've got the Zap, which only costs 2 elixir. And somebody once said, I think, that it's like if you have 2, maybe 3 cards that cost 2 or less elixir, then it's considered a cycle deck, because you can, essentially always be cycling through those cards, or almost always be cycling through those cards, and then cycling back to whatever you want to place down, like your spell, your major defensive thing, or maybe your win condition, like in a hog cycle deck, getting back to placing your hog again. right? So that's kind of the element of cycle that this deck has, and you can see in the last replay there that I finished, I actually cycled back to the miner really quickly, because all I needed to do was, get some chip damage off on the opponent's tower. I didn't want to go ahead and send in a 5 elixir balloon because it wasn't really necessary. All I needed to do was cycle back to either like the miner, and if that didn't work, just zap it to death, because it only needed like one more zap left to finish it off. So you do have that element of cycle in this deck, and you can also be cycling back to things like that Executioner Tornado combo for that huge defense, you know what I mean? So keep that in mind. You've got that kind of really heavy win condition, not really heavy, kind of medium elixir cost win condition, relatively heavy defense with the Executioner because he costs 5 elixir, which is pretty expensive for like a range support card, versus like a Musketeer or a Wizard or an Ice Wizard or something like that. I guess Wizard costs 5 too, but anyway, he's a kind of replacement for the Executioner anyway. Okay, so now that we've talked about the element of Zap Bait, let's talk about the selection of the 2 mini-tanks and why there's 2 in there. Well, first of all, the Valk is just really strong right now, and by the time that you watch this video, maybe even by the time that I get it out, she will have been nerfed, and I don't think she's going to get a major nerf. I think it's like a minor attack speed nerf, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's not going to really kill her, but she's just in like every deck right now because she's so strong. And I think that's the major reason that you have her in this deck. So she plays that mini-tank role, but she also plays the role of, clearing out like cleave, swarm units with her cleave, rather. Generally if you were running a deck in a different patch, in a different meta that was similar to this, you'd probably be running Ice Golem in the place of Valkyrie, and I'll talk about that more when I come to card replacements. But essentially, you send in the Ice Golem right in front, it goes for the tower, and right behind the Ice Golem you send in the balloon, and the Ice Golem is tanking for it. So the Valkyrie plays a similar role. She's just in there because she's so strong. Now, the Miner, on the other hand. Miner is good. He's a great mini-tank, and he plays multiple roles. You can actually use him on defense, and that's something that you want to resort to from time to time, if you have to. You can cycle back to him if necessary. You can use him to chip away at the opponent's tower. You don't have the poison, so you don't have that minor poison combination that makes a really deadly duo, but you do have that chip potential, and then you do have the potential to use him as a mini tank for your balloon. And let's talk about that again, or some more in just a second here. That's the next thing I want to mention, is sending in the balloon with a mini tank. So the miner, you send him in generally when you send your balloon in, but again, as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, there's a lot of other situations that you can use him in. Alright, so guys, the balloon. The balloon you generally send in, if not always send in with the mini-tank. So you got the miner and you got the Valkyrie. You got the 2 mini-tanks. So if you use one on defense or whatever, you've probably got the other. Or you use the Valkyrie on defense, and then of course as she lives, because she's so beefy right now, she'll go across to the opponent's side of the arena, and you can use her as the mini-tank for your balloon. Now, the miner, you can actually send the balloon in at the bridge and then send the miner in right after. And if you do it properly and fast enough, the miner will actually get to the Princess Tower before your balloon gets there. So the Princess Tower will have been locked onto the miner, which is what you want, because you want your balloon to take as little damage as possible, because you want it to live as long as possible, because it's so strong. It does an insane amount of damage if it gets to the enemy Princess Tower or King Tower. Just absolutely blows it up. One hit takes out like a third of the HP, plus the death damage, and the death damage has the potential to take out things like princesses that are, used on defense and then running forward onto offense, right? So all kinds of cool stuff, 2 or 3 hits and the tower's basically dead, if not fully dead at 3 hits, right? Now, this is a really cool thing to keep in mind, but before I mention it, let's go ahead and get rolling on to the next replay here. And lo and behold, this replay is actually going to be an excellent example of what I want to mention here. You can actually use your zap to retarget your Princess Tower, or rather their Princess Tower, from your balloon onto their miner. And this is something that I learned from Clash with Ash a while ago in a long video from a long time ago. Not a long video, but rather a video from a long time ago. You can use the zap because it's a stun to interrupt anything basically, the auto attack of anything, so that it retargets. And as you know in this game, unless it's like a unit that targets buildings only or something like that, basically every unit is going to target the closest enemy, and Princess Towers are included. So you send in your miner a little bit late, or maybe the balloon's going in first and they send you know, for some reason the princess tower is locked onto your balloon before the miner. You send in the miner after the balloon's already on its way. You can actually zap the princess tower, and I believe I just did this a little while ago. Zap the princess tower, and that'll cause the princess tower to de-target from your balloon and target onto the closest enemy, which is then your miner, because your miner will have been sent in right next to the princess tower. And you can do that, of course, with like the Valkyrie or just about anything too. So you can use that zap spell to retarget the princess tower, and that's a huge, fun and really powerful play to do with this deck. Just about any, you know, balloon deck. Good thing to keep in mind. All right, guys, let's talk about cycling your cards. A couple other things, and then my usual, you know, opening moves, card replacements. And I've got some cool replays, so this might be a little bit of a longer video, and we can just check out some of these awesome replays at the end here. Okay, so using your cycle cards, you don't want to just use them willy-nilly. And I mean, I'm guilty of this. I often just cycle cards in the back because I don't want to leak elixir. But if you can, you want to use them to get positive elixir traits, and you want to capitalize on those positive elixir traits, you know, and build up a big, massive counter push and try to obliterate your opponent, because you've essentially gotten more elixir than them, and you can get a wave, you know, of units that's worth more elixir down the lane at once, or, you know, send in more balloons in a quicker amount of time down the lane at once, right? Or not at once, but in succession, one after another, because you can cycle back to them quicker, having more elixir. So don't just waste your skeletons every time in the back. Try to use them to, you know, counter something like a Prince or a Mini P.E.K.K.A. They're great against even like this giant skeleton coming down here. You can use them for, you know, unusual things, like place them in the center of the arena when there's minions or a minion horde coming down, and then they'll actually, you know, gain the attention of the minion horde, and like 3 or 4 of the minions from the minion horde will go over to the skeletons and chase them away. And on top of that, that'll engage your other princess tower. So now you got 2 princess towers countering that minion horde. And, you know, you've gained some of the attention of them and gotten them away so that they're coming in slower to your 1 princess tower, and then of course it takes less damage because there's not a whole bunch of them on top of it at once. So what I'm trying to say here is, you know, it's okay to cycle your cards just in the back sometimes if you don't have anything else to do and you don't want to waste elixir, but if you get the options to, then definitely try to use your cycle cards to get some serious positive elixir trades, and, you know, don't just waste them all the time. Alright, one thing that stands out to me in this deck is the fact that there is no heavy spell. So that's really interesting. I think that it's just not really necessary. And that's just my personal observation. I think that the person who crafted this deck just found that it's really not necessary with the overall power that this deck has. When you have a deck like this with, you know, like a really powerful heavy win condition like the balloon, then you don't necessarily need that fireball or that rocket, because you might want to invest that, you know, one card slot, one of your 8 cards, which is a huge thing. If you think about it, it's not Hearthstone. There's not 30 cards in a deck. There's only 8. So like 1 card slot can make a huge difference in your deck. So, you know, if you want to invest in a heavy spell, you can, but the crafter of this deck probably found that it wasn't necessary, because the major win condition is getting the balloon to the tower, and, you know, cycling the balloon and, you know, chipping away at the tower with that really heavy auto attack from the balloon. So it's not like really a chip, you know, slowly take away their tower. It's kind of like a, okay, I got the balloon in there for that one sweet win, that one sweet connection where it gets off like 2 or 3 auto attacks, or even just 1, and just absolutely obliterates the tower. So that being said, you know, you're not really trying to get to a point where you need to cycle your spells onto the tower. You're trying to play safe and, you know, get that defense going with the Executioner Tornado combo, and then get that sweet balloon connection and just absolutely destroy their tower. Alright guys, let's talk about opening moves and card replacements, as I like to do, and then we'll move on to some more replays. So for opening moves, you could cycle in the back. Now, this is something that I just mentioned, I kind of discouraged a little while ago, but it is an option. I don't like leaking elixir. A lot of people don't mind, especially if your opponent hasn't played anything yet. A lot of people don't mind, like, okay, I'll just wait until they play something, I won't play anything. I don't mind leaking that little bit of elixir, but personally, that's not how I like to play. So I would cycle like my Ice Spirit or my Skeletons or something in the back. Maybe even like my Valkyrie or my Executioner. It's a little bit risky to cycle the Executioner in the back because then they know that you have that and that you're probably running some sort of an Exenado deck. This is such an off-meta weird deck that, you know, they might not know that you're playing it just based on your Executioner, but they might, like, rock it and log it or something like that, you know, or do something to try to destroy it or counter it. So generally I like using the cheaper cards because they're a little bit less of a risk, if that makes sense. You're not investing as much. And on top of that, you've invested 5 elixir. Ooh, check out this tornado here. Pull them all together, and the Valkyrie does the job. Well, that wasn't the one I was thinking of, but we'll run into another cool one later here, I believe. So anyway, you're investing 5 elixir, so then if they send a hog or whatever in the opposite lane of your Executioner, you've only got that 5 elixir left in your hand to counter it. Or maybe they'll do an aggressive giant at the bridge or something like that, right? So that's kind of the downside of cycling a heavier card. You could try to chip away at the Princess Tower with like a miner or something as an opener, but generally I would cycle cards in fact. One thing that I learned from a CWA video recently was when you do something like cycling skeletons in the back, you get to full elixir again so quickly that you can't really do much with those skeletons. Like, there's not much you can do to counter them or to combine with them. Oh, there's that epic tornado I was talking about. Check that out. And then I connect to the tower here and just absolutely destroy it and manage to win with just a little bit of health left on that tower. Epic tornado for the win there. So anyway, what I was trying to say about that tip that I learned from the CWA video is that if you put your skeletons, or maybe even like your Ice Spirit, a little bit closer up, well, the Ice Spirit, no, he can kind of handle his own. He'll get to the Princess Tower on his own, but the skeletons will just die to the Princess Tower. So if you put them a little bit closer up, like in front of your Princess Tower or something like that, then you generally can put something in front of them right after that and actually gain some sort of value with those skeletons so they don't just completely melt to the Princess Tower. And this is just something that I heard on another video, so it's not necessarily like the best, you know, play ever, and it's not like some secret that we've unlocked or anything like that, but it's just kind of a cool little idea that I heard, cool concept, and I thought, okay, that makes sense, so something to keep in mind for sure. Lastly, you could possibly open with your balloon and your miner, or like your Valkyrie and your balloon right behind it, but that's kind of like a high risk, high reward play. You know, I don't know how I feel about that. I would generally cycle stuff in the back, play defense a little bit, because then you're also giving your major win condition away, and if they've got a counter in hand, then they know what you have, and you don't have that option to like surprise them and be like, oh crud, they sent in a balloon, how am I going to counter it, I don't have my counter in hand, etc, etc. So, not the best play, but it's an option if you want to be risky. It has worked out for me a couple times. I just be a little bit aggressive, send in that balloon early on, and it works out. With the miner tanking for it, you know, the balloon will definitely take out the tower, unless they send out something really heavy to counter it, of course. Alright guys, let's talk about card replacements next. So, for the Executioner, I was thinking about this for a little bit, and I thought there's actually some viable replacements for him. Ooh, I just thought of something else. Bowler. Bowler might work, but Bowler doesn't target air. That's the only problem. So the replacements that I was thinking of, go-to would be the Wizard. And I mentioned this earlier. The Wizard costs 5 elixir as well, if I'm not mistaken. So it's very similar to the Executioner, and it plays a similar role. A little bit less HP. You know, it dies to the Fireball and Zap, whereas the Executioner doesn't. But it plays that role of the ranged support unit that has a really heavy, hard-hitting splash damage effect. Ooh, I think that tornado, I mean, come on, that poison was an absolute misplay. I mean, it has to have been. Why would he ever do that? It is definitely a misplay. But anyway, Wizard would be a decent replacement for the Executioner. Another replacement that I was thinking of would be the Magic Archer, because it's kind of like a splash damage unit that works decent in cycle decks and has that, you know, synergy with the tornado. Or even the Ice Wizard. This is something that I've done in a lot of tornado decks. Ooh, look at that death damage from that balloon. Awesome. The Ice Wizard works out really well with Tornado. I used to run like a Hog Jack with Ice Wizard deck. So it's like a Lumberjack, Hog Rider kind of cycle deck with Ice Wizard and Tornado. And it synergizes really well with the Tornado because it has that splash damage. You know, it slows all the units. Look at that offensive Tornado at the end there. And, oh, I didn't quite, I wasn't able to zap properly and get it de-targeted onto my miner. But I actually pulled those 2 wizards away, allowing my miner to finish off that tower there and just chip away at it and kind of finish off the job on his own. Who needs a tornado, right? Just send in your miner to do all the work for you. So yeah, that Ice Wizard. I think the Ice Wizard would be another very viable replacement. Otherwise, just some sort of a range support unit. but those, I think you want something with splash, and there's a lot of options in there. So something that synergizes with that tornado, because that's really core. Talking about replacements for the executioner, the Exenado is really core in this deck. It's really kind of a staple in this deck. It's an executioner tornado deck that is combined or comboed with the Balloon Cycle deck, basically. So if you are going to replace them, range splash unit. For the cycle cards, like the skeletons or the ice spirit up there on the top left there, those top two ones, I would go with more cycle cards, basically. If you don't like skeletons, bats are always a fun, viewable replacement. They're kind of like air skeletons. They cost a little bit more, so it makes your deck slightly heavier, but it's still kind of a cycle deck because they only cost 2 elixir. There's 5 of them, but they don't have that potential to counter things like Mini-P.E.K.K.A. or P.E.K.K.A. or Prince, or like the really heavy-hitting single-target units for only 1 elixir. But regardless, bats have really high DPS, so they can do things like destroy Mini-P.E.K.K.A. before it even gets to the tower, as long as they don't get zapped. And that brings in a whole new element of like zap bait, because, well, as I'm saying this, he zapped my skeletons, but they usually won't just zap your skeletons. However, your opponent will often, if not always, zap bats. So another replacement for the 2 cycle cards might be just like another cheap unit like spear goblins or something like that. For the miner, my go-to replacement for the miner would be the knight. Another replacement could be the ice golem, but honestly I was thinking of that as the replacement for the Valkyrie. So generally you want like a mini-tank. Another option for the miner might be like the bandit or the royal ghost, but since we're talking about card replacements, it's generally because like, oh, I don't have this legendary or I don't have this card leveled up. So the knight is kind of like the go-to free-to-play friendly replacement, if that makes sense. Other than that, the cards that I just mentioned beforehand. Ooh, and just one thing before I forget, you can use the miner to counter pumps. That goes without being said, but I'll say it anyway. Miner is a great counter to elixir pumps. So for the Valkyrie, I mentioned the ice golem. Again, you could replace it with like the royal ghost or the dark prince. Even would be a decent replacement for the Valkyrie, especially if he gets buffed relatively soon, because he's not too great right now. But the reason that I like the ice golem is because it combos really well with the tornado, first of all, or not the tornado. Oh, yeah, the tornado. But I was thinking the balloon. It combos with both of those really well. But it combos really well with the balloon because you can place it right at the bridge and then send in the balloon right behind it. Kind of like I did right there with the Valkyrie. But see, he's able to pull my Valkyrie away, actually send in the miner in time and get the enemy princess tower to target onto the miner, which works out really well for me. And I kind of hand the baton or the Valkyrie hands the baton off from herself over to the miner to finish up the job of tanking. But an ice golem, on the other hand, would have gone directly for the tower and would have tanked for that balloon for much longer, even though it has less HP. Now, the ice golem also synergizes with the tornado, as I mentioned, because it's death damage. It does damage to everything around it when it dies, and also slows them for a second or so. So that works out pretty well with the tornado. If you pull everything together into your ice golem's death damage, it's nothing too amazing. It's just like if you happen to combine those two things together well, then it might work out and give you, some kind of cool synergy. Alright, next we got the zap. I would say log. That's usually my replacement for the zap, or even like snowball or arrows. But the thing is that zap really plays that like stun role in this deck and gives you the option to you cause your opponent's princess tower to de-target from your balloon onto your miner or your Valkyrie or whatever else you have in front of your balloon, basically. For the reasons that I mentioned, for a long time earlier. I don't need to repeat myself on that. Alright, so those would be my go-to replacements for the zap, but again, you kind of want the zap in there because of that stun effect. And who doesn't have zap? Zap's like one of the most common spells. It's like the most commonly played card in the game. Literally, it has been for a long time. So no real need to replace it, but if you were wanting to have fun, or for some reason you don't have zap leveled or whatever, then those other cards would be my go-to replacements. For the tornado, I don't know, man. You can't really replace the tornado in this deck. It synergizes so well with everything. That synergy with the Valkyrie, with the executioner, with the zap, with the death damage from the balloon. I mean, what else? It even goes with like the ice spirit. You could tornado everything together and ice spirit it and freeze a bunch of units at once with the tornado ice spirit. Like, that's actually a viable play you can make. So I wouldn't replace it with anything, but if you absolutely had to, maybe like a cheap defensive structure like a Tesla or even a cannon or something like that, because it is kind of a cycle deck after all. And if you're going to do that, you don't really need to run like the executioner. I would run like a cheaper range support card, like a musketeer or archers, and just make it like a balloon cycle deck. That's personally what I would do. For the balloon, maybe another win condition like skeleton barrel or ram. Skelly barrel, ever since they nerfed it, it fell off the map, and they tried to rebuff it a little bit, but it's still really underplayed. It's not that great right now, but if you wanted to try a skeleton barrel deck, it would fit into that balloon slot. Otherwise, maybe like a battle ram, or even like, I don't know, a hog rider or something like that, right? Royal hogs, if they're still good after they get nerfed here, you know, in the next day or so, right? Alright guys, that is it for card replacements, I believe. So let's just go ahead and finish up this last replay here, and then we will call it a video. Definitely a longer video this time, but I had fun recording it. It's definitely a deck that I did a lot of work on. I did pretty well with. I played a lot of matches with this deck, and you know, it's a really fun one to play. So you can see here I'm able to just completely shut down his hog every time with that tornado, and I get the 2 towers down, finish off the match. Alright guys, that is it. Make sure that you leave a thumbs up because that really helps out the channel. I really appreciate that. Leave a comment in the comment section below if you have any questions, or you have any suggestions, or you just have something cool to say. Thanks so much for watching guys, and have a good night.